this set of conversations was around how do we get people who are doing incredible work to talk to each other? How do we create context for them to have a conversation that's productive? And then how do we sort of really document, learn from, listen to what they have to say?
Really wanted to give people real space to talk and build and argue and think and battle and set a collective vision.
I think that it's intentional to send our kids to, and our young people and our family members to prison because it builds the economy, right? So the privatization of prisons and that growing prison industrial complex fuels, I think, the political will not to improve schools, but to lock us up. So, I mean, I think that's another political context that's a little bit different then and now. I think there's a lot of different models of youth engagement. I feel like over the years, YUC's elevation in political power, young people have sat on every task force and every planning process that are very adult-centered. They're not fully decision-making bodies. They're long and involved, and it wears young people thin. And so, especially young people who spent 2 years working on these reports, because these were no easy thing to accomplish. What we're saying is, here's your youth engagement. In the back of here is a set of policy recommendations that young people have come up with. They spent 2 years developing. We want you to implement it. We're not just going to sit at a table and have a discussion again. Right. And so that's how we've been viewing youth engagement.
We also have a white paper or briefing or something that's coming out actually in a couple of weeks with the Alliance for Educational Justice and the Gay Straight Alliance. That is really targeting the issue of, it's the intersection of the school to prison pipeline and LGBTQ issues in schools, with kind of like the idea that we wanted to frame the issue so that the bullying piece doesn't do what you were talking about, doesn't, move us over into we need zero tolerance in order to deal with this. So, and the Department of Justice have really taken on this issue of school discipline and are really trying to make some changes. They, increase the data that's being captured. So now it's arrests in addition to suspensions at the federal level. And then they also are doing more Title VI complaints than they've done, of course, during the Bush years, many more than that. But really looking at discipline as an issue that they're taking on. So all of these pieces seem to be really kind of fitting together nicely, and we're seeing a growth in the number of groups that are taking on this issue across the country, and a change in discourse with stakeholders, including the teachers unions. We've been in discussions with NEA and the AFT, because at the national level they have pretty good language about what they believe in, but unfortunately it doesn't trickle down. So we're working with them to get folks on board with a different way of doing discipline that doesn't criminalize young people of color. So I would stop there.
And one of those individuals we had a conversation with was Andrew Wolk. And Andrew, and I'll allow him to tell his own story, but Andrew came to us from a social entrepreneurial perspective. How do you merge the different sectors of both nonprofit, business models, but also how do you also bring that into accountability measures that people will also be able to see the impacts and the effects in which you want to see in the work that we're talking about, because that's all foundations talk about now. Sean makes this joke, keeps joking about Roy. He keeps talking about, Obama talking about taking care of Roy. And he's like, what's Roy? Who's Roy? He's like, return on investment. And I was like, I'm thinking he's talking about his cousin Roy or something. So we're talking about Roy. Leadership STEM Institute was about Roy, and Sean's like, you stole my joke.
I gave it to you. My collaboration.
But when we start the process, we start with Andrew Wolk, and it's interesting. Here's a white male who was working with some of our grantees currently, very innovative in his approach, ruffles some of our own feathers, and quirkiness, our own quirkiness coming together and meshing. And we decided that, let's try to go in deep and try to create a leadership and sustainability institute. It wasn't named that at the time. What we were just talking about was capacity building and how do you build technical assistance and capacity for organizations. But I don't know the last time OSF had 2 black men at the same time working on one issue. I don't know when that would happen again. So I passed it to Andrew and asked him to come up, just talk about this model, but within the backdrop of knowing that we have to seize a moment, we have to seize an opportunity, and this is why we're doing this. And I say, when I came to this job and I told Sean when he hired me, I wasn't looking for a job. I told him I didn't need the money, I needed to get a position. But what I told him is my commitment is that if this space is a little better than it was when I entered it, then I did my job. And that the conversation that we're having now is different than it was over the last 10 years when I've been having conversations about all the issues I care about, from school to prison pipeline to education. Those conversations, we keep having the same conversation.
So the lens I wanted to put on those 2 approaches was that we are coming to the Leadership and Sustainable Institute with a very particular perspective, that in all the work that we did, we found that when we were doing our work with an organization, what we were implicitly doing is actually building leadership. By the fact that we're going through a relatively rigorous process, that by working with those leaders, we're working with them in the context of how they develop the organization.
So talking about race is one thing, and talking through race is another thing, because I really believe that maybe at the beginning the nexus was the focus on black male achievement, but that we have a booming Latino population, we have a booming immigrant refugee population that we need to really start to think about. Because we're looking at political and tactical purposes, we have to really start engaging these folks. Sometimes there's language barriers, sometimes there's just accessibility barriers to our communication, right? This comes from someone whose grandfather did cotton in Mississippi, and hearing stories of how Latino and black compete against each other, and thinking that there's no healing that needs to take place. So when we hear about the Kellogg Foundation doing this whole American healing, that we can't just come in here and think it's all good in the hood, because there's a lot of stuff that's happened and that we need to really address. When you hear stories of grantees coming up to people in foundations saying, hey, we're giving more money to that person than this group. They're talking that there's some tension there that we need to really address, and what Michael was talking about it, is that we need to also be honest with ourselves. That are we talking about equity in a way that's intentionally inclusive or exclusive? Because people get a mixed message.
Right, but there's been investments in having to create that space and within its offended group around the work targeting black men and boys, but there's this broader set, right, around helping men, helping communities that, grant makers for children, youth, and families, right? And so how are those, but then at the same time, what is the collective of the investment in sort of, HMHC, ADFI, and Foundation Center, which I don't think we've always put in that pot, but is in that pot, right? But then also, what are the gaps as well? We have to think of the infrastructure piece, because you'll learn about what Foundation's doing on other panels. I promise you that's how it happens.
It amazes me that Foundation presidents can become presidents without having certain competencies. One, about the nonprofit sector and how nonprofits work, but also about issues in this country.
Right.
We just caught a set of guidelines, I will say, going through the Council of Foundations process about competencies and skills for CEOs. There's nothing about issues of race, there's nothing about understanding how nonprofits run. So one, I would say we always got to keep an eye on see what's happening there. But also, just to really invest in and focus on building the competencies. Because I actually think there are more people out there in our field that would move this work if they were supported in doing so. Every foundation that we talk to, we do this training where it says, okay, now what do we do? And we have some capacity in the field to support the folks that want to do this.
What we're struggling with now is, how to include a focus on boys and men of color across the whole programmatic effort of the foundation. So it really gets to the tension that Robert raised earlier, which is, you're trying to program kind of a structural issue. And I think we're getting closer, but the key, I think, for us is certainly figuring out how to make sure there's accountability mechanisms internally. And one of the things that it's actually playing out in our organization is having clear metrics around boys and men of color impact, at least from the strategy perspective, across the whole foundation. So it's going to be in Bob Ross's CEO goals that the board's going to hold them accountable to. It's going to be in the evaluation across our 3 programmatic priorities. We're still working that out, but it's going to be structurally in the strategic plan. The question is, when the plan is over, right, 10 years later, when Ross is gone, does the endowment continually have this perspective? Our CEO, Robert Ross, is going to take a 3-month study leave this summer to focus on this issue. And the reason he's coming tomorrow, and he's going to miss most of the 2 days, but he wanted to come tomorrow because he wanted to meet folks who are in this space, right? So that he can get his mind organized for his 3-month leave. So when you see him tomorrow, go and encourage him. Don't say that I told you to do it, but you should go and encourage him to really take those 3 months and show some leadership out in the field.
Can we do it all at the same time?
There we go.
But one quick thing about when you said that, he, not a whole lot, who were the CEOs who sort of feel it and get it, and Natasha knows I'm keeping dead horse on this. We have not created a space where for the ones who do feel it to be in the same room. Because there are, Sharice West, she made it happen in Arkansas. That's why I said she's CEO. I mean, I can name through the ones who are, whole really, really busy people, but who creates that space, right? Because, you know what I mean? Because he's more encouraged in that, this bold thing he's doing in that study leave, in knowing who some of the partners are to be, who already could be thought partners. And that what he learns could not just benefit him, but some peers who already get it, and some peers who go help move them on.
So these are essentially some of the questions that we want to answer today. How are boys and young men of color being framed in the news media? And I think you could just even do this and just say, how are boys and young men of color being framed in the media? It could be entertainment, it could be gaming, it could be the news media, etc. How can we reframe the conversation to build public support for efforts to invest in young men of color? What can we do to make sure that our frames take hold? And how do we get the media to cover our issues? This is another example of just to kind of, we're calling this one the bad parent frame. It's a dominant cultural framework that exists. This is a version that was in the Oakland Tribune article. It's a systemic problem with Oakland. The root cause is parenting or lack thereof. Change the way the families of these, and I noticed the quotes around black boys, that kind of gave me the chills. View education and discipline, then you will see improvement. So the thing that's interesting is, for me, these quotes around black boys, very telling. It said something to me. What does it say to folks in this room? It's an indictment, but it's also a way to say them. Not us, them. And I don't believe that we're going to solve the challenges that we're facing if all of America sees us as them. So yep. You're right. You're absolutely right. That's right. Yeah, it's us, them.
Sharing content. Most of us, I think, have some sort of online presence, right? I have a website, for instance, a blog called New Black Man, and so I'm always searching for content. One of the reasons why I was interested in Studology 101, right? Because these websites have to be dynamic. If we're not presenting new content on websites on a daily basis, folks don't come to the websites. You increase traffic by making sure that their content is dynamic. So you're always in this need for content, right? And you see this on Twitter. Folks on Twitter are always looking for content. They're hungry for that. And so what happens is when you get folks who are doing incredible content, and YouTube allows you to embed anything, so it allows you to share that content, which not only brings traffic to your own individual site, but it also allows you to celebrate quality work that's out there and get that to audiences that, say, Studology might not be able to reach.
I think it all depends on what the
it the kind of thing that somebody would, people don't just share any old video. If
right.
we were all kind of talking about the medium and not the message, I think what kids have that we don't have is they know what other young people will be willing to consume.
Right.
You knew what
Right.
other people would, you kid too.
Right.
You knew what other people would. But no, but you knew that when, or somebody knew when they did the thing 50 Cent Barack, somebody knew this is going to be kind of thing that young people are going to love.
Yeah.
So
And
it depends on how it's interior, bite size. It's not just the size. It's what's the message. And so it doesn't, all this stuff will work integrated together. But and I think that it is driven by a younger demographic. But it's not the messenger. It's the message, I think.
What we do is we publish books that are malleable and that are the products of long-term research or creative imagination, and they become other media. They become ebooks, they become chapters and excerpts in all textbooks. Acapulco Press is the largest broker of Hispanic content material to the whole textbook industry. We get about 70% of our income from licensing to the textbook industry. Translations to other languages, TV shows, movies, all kinds of things. It all starts there with what we hope is a quality project, and much of the discussion here today is about how to get, onto various other types of media, electronic media, blogs and all this kind of stuff, but the electronic world is so overpopulated. How do you compete with the billions of data that are out there? How are people going to find you, etc.?
I just want to add that maybe for a little bit more discussion tomorrow around the notion of games and gaming. Because what you said just now about the Twitter, that's interactivity. That's interactivity as they're watching it. So the notion of passive, the passive experience of media is no longer necessary, and especially for our youth, that doesn't exist for them. It's about interactivity. And we cannot have this discussion unless we're talking about gaming as well.
Great.
So.